They're calling it a ban. It isn't. What's real is a multi-state noise enforcement squeeze that's tagging older Harleys first. Not through new laws you voted on, but through administrative policy and automated cameras. New York City made its noise camera pilot permanent under Local Law 7, 2024. Automated mics snap your plate and mail fines that start big and climb fast. Other cities and states are piloting the same tech right now. And in places like California, the 80 decibel limit for motorcycles, post-1985, was already on the books. They're just enforcing it harder. This is why some riders are finding registrations flagged, inspections failed, and premiums jumping. It feels like a ban when your tag gets held, but it's really compliance by bureaucracy. Tonight, we'll cut the rumor mill and show dates, thresholds, and playbook, where cameras are live, what DB numbers inspectors use, how DMV guidance spreads, and exactly what to do so your bike passes without neutering its soul. Freedom's still legal. You just need to ride smarter than the paperwork. The 12-state ambush. It happened quietly. No news conferences, no televised hearings, not even a whisper of warning. One morning, Harley riders across 12 states woke up to find their registrations void, their tags flagged, or their bikes impounded on site. It felt impossible. These were legal machines, Harleys that had roared across state lines for decades, passing inspections, paying taxes, obeying the road. But overnight, something changed. Letters arrived from local departments of motor vehicles. Some cited updated compliance guidance. Others offered no explanation at all. Riders shared stories online of being pulled over for routine checks, only to be told their motorcycles were no longer compliant. Mechanics watched loyal customers break down in disbelief. Veterans, factory workers, and weekend riders suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of an invisible law. The model most often targeted was the FX 1200 Super Glide, an icon of American grit, now labeled an outlaw. The enforcement wave hit like a coordinated ambush, leaving riders stunned and furious. For many, the outrage wasn't just about the bikes, it was about the betrayal. No one voted on this. No one had a chance to speak. Freedom on two wheels had been replaced by a form letter and a tow truck. If no one voted for this, who did? Behind closed doors. To understand the ambush, you have to look past the headlines and into the paperwork. The bans weren't born in state legislatures. They grew from inside offices most riders never see. Buried within bureaucratic networks, a quiet chain of coordination unfolded. The American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, a nonprofit that provides best practices to state DMVs, circulated internal recommendations in late 2023. The language was vague but powerful, urging states to align motorcycle registration policies with forward environmental targets. Within weeks, a dozen states mirrored the same policies almost word for word. There were no press releases or open votes, just new internal memos and refreshed inspection standards. Local clerks began enforcing the rules before the public even knew they existed. The system didn't need a law, it just needed guidance, and once that guidance hit the network, every office followed suit. When questioned, state officials claimed it was about safety and emissions, yet none could point to an actual statute. It was an invisible machine running on administrative autopilot. For the riders losing their registrations, that distinction didn't matter. Whether you call it a policy update or a ban, the result was the same. Thousands of legal Harleys suddenly illegal. But why were Harleys first on the list? If this ban hits home, hit like right now and drop a comment. Let's hear your story. Every rider's voice counts, and together, we keep the truth roaring. The target profile. At first glance, the focus on older Harleys looked random, but to regulators, those machines fit a specific profile. The FX 1200 Super Glide, along with older Sportsters, carried the kind of sound and exhaust signature that modern decibel readers instantly flag. The deep, throaty rumble that riders loved was exactly what enforcement software classified as non-compliant. Combined with a culture of modification, custom pipes, aftermarket carburetors, fuel tuners, these bikes stood out on every data chart. Officials cited noise violations and outdated calibration systems, but insiders knew this was about optics as much as emissions. The government could not easily measure an individual rider's carbon output, but it could measure sound. Loud meant visible, and visible meant targetable. Once a few high-profile citations went viral, agencies realized they could appear tough on pollution without touching cars or trucks that produced far more emissions. The algorithm did the rest. Harleys weren't singled out by accident. They were chosen because they symbolized rebellion. To bureaucrats chasing compliance goals, that image was inconvenient. To riders, it was sacred. That explains the attention, but not the punishment. Riders learn the hard way. Trust the gear, not the marketing. The description has what I use every day on the road. Check it out before we continue. Paper trail and penalties. The letters told the story in sterile, bureaucratic tone. Your motorcycle no longer meets updated compliance requirements. That line appeared in thousands of envelopes mailed across 12 states. In some cases, riders received warnings. In others, fines arrived. $200, $500, even $1,000 for continued operation of a non-compliant vehicle. Insurance companies began to follow suit, quietly raising premiums or refusing coverage for flagged models. Some riders reported their plates were revoked entirely, forcing them to park bikes they had owned for decades. Then came the roadside enforcement. Officers carrying new sound meters began conducting stop and measure tests in parking lots and on main streets. Riders who protested were told to take it up with the DMV. Tow trucks followed. It wasn't violence, but it felt like it. The loss wasn't just financial, it was personal. These were bikes restored by hand, paid off over years, cherished like family. And all it took was one line of policy text to erase them from the road. The outrage spread from garages to state capitals, yet Harley-Davidson remained silent. The company that built America's loudest legend offered no defense for the riders who kept its legacy alive. While riders faced citations, Harley made a quiet move of its own. Harley's quiet pivot. Inside Harley-Davidson's Milwaukee headquarters, silence echoed louder than the pipes once did. While riders fought roadside battles with inspectors, the motor company had already moved on. Internal documents from 2022 showed the decision to sunset the FX 1200 Superglide and its sister models. Officially, the reason was modernization, aligning product lines with long-term emission objectives. Unofficially, it was about profit and optics. The same machines that made Harley a working man's badge of honor no longer fit the image corporate leaders wanted to sell overseas. Instead of defending loyal owners, Harley launched a new campaign focused on sleek, liquid-cooled engines and advanced electronics. The brochures bragged about compliance, efficiency, and digital precision. Gone were the words rebellion and freedom, replaced by performance and control. Dealers were instructed to phase out parts tied to older air-cooled models, pushing customers toward premium replacements with higher margins. Some internal memos even advised staff to avoid discussion of discontinued units in public forums. It wasn't defiance anymore, it was damage control dressed as innovation. To riders who built their identity around the Superglide's roar, Harley's silence cut deeper than any ticket. They didn't just lose a model, they lost representation from the company they helped build. But the riders refused to stay quiet. Legal firefight. When the bans began spreading and Harley remained silent, lawyers stepped in. Civil liberty groups saw the issue as bigger than a brand. It was a question of due process. How could a state revoke a legal registration without public notice or a clear statute? In early 2025, a coalition of attorneys in Michigan, New York, and Oregon filed the first class actions against state agencies, arguing that riders had been deprived of property rights without hearings. Their legal briefs compared the enforcement tactics to seizure without trial, a phrase that resonated far beyond motorcycle culture. The American Civil Liberties Union hinted at involvement, citing equal protection concerns. Smaller organizations like Riders for Fair Roads began crowdfunding legal defenses for individuals fined under the new rules. Meanwhile, constitutional scholars debated whether motorcycle ownership could qualify as expressive conduct, a form of cultural speech protected by the First Amendment. The idea sounded radical, but it captured something true. For many, a Harley wasn't transportation, it was testimony. Court filings multiplied, and politicians began to notice. A few sympathetic lawmakers introduced bills demanding transparency from DMVS. But legal wheels turned slowly, and fines were piling up fast. The courtroom war was only beginning, yet riders were already fighting their own battles on the street. In courthouse hallways, denim met marble. Lawyers carried binders, riders carried conviction. Each affidavit read like a protest sign printed in Times New Roman. The fight wasn't just legal, it was cultural. A struggle to prove that ownership still meant autonomy in modern America. Still, most riders didn't wait for court. They fought from the saddle. The Rider's Survival Manual. When laws grow murky, survival becomes mechanical. Across 12 states, Harley owners started trading strategies online. Inspection lines turned into classrooms. Veteran riders shared decibel test tips, showing newcomers how to position the sound meter, maintain proper idle speed, and verify results before handing a sheet to inspectors. Mechanics produced checklists, factory baffles installed, catalytic converters intact, no exhaust leaks, and sold laminated cards explaining legal sound limits. It was guerrilla compliance, taught one parking lot at a time. Others documented every detail of their bikes, serial numbers on mufflers, stamped EPA codes on engines, photos of original parts. Those records became their defense when accused of tampering. Forums published templates for appeals and letters demanding decibel readings from certified meters. Even social media turned militant. Hashtags like Save Our Superglide and Right to Ride spread across feeds, transforming frustration into strategy. For many, this was more than protest, it was adaptation. Riders realized that beating bureaucracy meant understanding it. Each inspection passed, each citation overturned, became a small victory carved from the same stubborn independence that once defined the Harley spirit. Knowledge became armor. Forums turned into classrooms where veterans taught rookies how to out-document bureaucracy. Every inspection became a chess match. Compliance wasn't surrender anymore, it was strategy. They weren't rebelling for chaos, they were rebelling for competence, proving freedom could be smart, measured, and lawful. Yet every rider kept asking the same question: why now? The timing trap. To understand why everything exploded at once, you have to look at timing. The crackdown didn't come from nowhere. In late 2023, several states adopted updated environmental frameworks modeled after California's stricter policies. These updates weren't aimed solely at motorcycles, but once applied to registration systems, older bikes were the easiest to flag. Add to that the federal government's renewed push for electric vehicle incentives, and the pattern made sense. Cleaner headlines, cleaner roads, cleaner data. Harleys, with their iconic rumble, became an easy symbol to silence. Politically, the moment was perfect. Environmental committees were under pressure to show measurable progress, and targeting loud, visible machines provided instant optics. Within weeks, states began aligning with shared language passed quietly through administrative networks. Once the first DMV implemented the new noise metrics, others followed out of caution and conformity. It looked coordinated because, in a way, it was no conspiracy, just bureaucrats copying what seemed safe. By the time riders noticed, the enforcement clock was already ticking. Each citation and revocation wasn't just enforcement, it was proof that the policy machinery was running smoothly. Harley's loyal base became the test case for a new era of compliance. Patterns emerged like oil stains under light, each state's move aligning with budget cycles and election years. Environmental headlines made perfect camouflage. Beneath the noise, Timing became weaponized, designed to crush dissent before it organized. Riders weren't caught off guard. They were cornered by coordination. And that timing spelled trouble for Harley's oldest legend, the FX1200 Underfire. For half a century, the FX1200 Superglide has been more than steel and chrome. It has been a handshake between generations. Built from the bones of Harley's big twins, it carried the heart of rebellion that roared through the 1970s. It was the factory custom that didn't ask permission, the working man's dream on two wheels. For small-town riders, veterans, and mechanics, the Superglide wasn't a toy or trophy. It was identity. Every dent in the tank and scratch on the pipes told a story about sweat, distance, and freedom. But under the new noise and emissions regimes, that identity became a liability. The old shovelhead and evolution engines, once praised for character, now sit on enforcement lists labeled as non-compliant. Inspectors holding digital sound meters don't hear tradition, they hear violation. What regulators call outdated, riders call soul. And yet, the law doesn't speak the language of soul. One by one, these bikes vanished from the streets, either garaged, sold for parts, or stripped down to dodge registration flags. For the Harley faithful, watching the Superglide fade from public roads feels like watching an era erased. The bike that once symbolized open defiance now symbolizes quiet resistance. Every time an old Superglide fires up, it reminds the world what American iron once sounded like. That thunder carries history, pride, rebellion, and now defiance. The state may classify it as noise, but to riders, it's the national anthem in metal, and the shockwaves hit the garages next. Dealers and indie fallout. In the months after the crackdown, Harley dealerships across multiple states started closing their service bays early. Sales floors that once hummed with customers now echoed with silence. Mechanics were sent home, technicians reassigned, and entire shipments of FX and Sportster parts were quietly canceled. A dealer in Pennsylvania said 70% of his small parts inventory became unsellable overnight. Independent shops that had survived recessions and pandemics suddenly faced their hardest test: bureaucracy. Parts distributors refused to ship components flagged as non-compliant. Some suppliers demanded liability waivers from garage owners, afraid of state penalties if they sold outdated exhausts. Independent mechanics, the backbone of Harley culture, scrambled to adapt. Many pivoted from performance tuning to restoration work, keeping records to prove every rebuild met inspection codes. Others gave up, closing decades-old businesses when insurance and compliance paperwork crushed profit margins. The collapse wasn't just economic, it was personal. Local shops had been gathering places, part repair station, part therapy session. Losing them meant losing community. Riders began hosting garage nights at home just to keep the spirit alive. But even in those backyards, parts were harder to find, and trust was fading. The crackdown that began as paperwork had become cultural damage. When the lights dimmed in those garages, something deeper than business died. Generations had built livelihoods around torque and trust, not compliance codes. Watching shutters close felt like watching freedom auctioned off by the square foot. Silence replaced the clatter of wrenches. Technology soon made matters worse. If you believe riders still deserve the open road, subscribe now. We're exposing every threat they hide behind red tape, because the next ban could be sitting in your own garage. Technology tightens the noose. At first, riders thought the bans were the worst of it. Then came the machines that never blink. In early 2025, cities like Seattle, Boston, and Denver began testing automated noise monitoring systems, sound cameras mounted on street poles that capture decibel spikes and match them to license plates. Each time a Harley rolled past, the microphones listened like snitches. Within weeks, warning notices followed riders home, complete with digital evidence packets and automated fines. At inspection centers, the same technology crept into official use. Sound meters calibrated to stricter settings flagged bikes that once passed with ease. databases linked to VIN numbers began storing compliance histories. 3 failed tests in a season could now trigger a registration hold, leaving a perfectly running machine trapped by paperwork. For vintage bikes with louder profiles, like the FX1200, the algorithms rarely gave the benefit of the doubt. Even mobile patrol cars adopted the tools, using handheld scanners to identify decibel peaks and possible emissions tampering. Riders started calling them noise radars. A culture once built on human judgment was now at the mercy of automated enforcement. Every throttle twist felt like data entry. Progress promised efficiency, but delivered paranoia. Every ride felt like being graded by ghosts in satellites. Riders started memorizing quiet routes, avoiding main streets that listened too closely. The future wasn't loud. It was whispering, recording, and ready to issue tickets at the speed of data. But not every fight ends in defeat. When riders win. For every rider fined, there was another who fought back and won. In Maryland, a retired mechanic named Earl Donovan appealed his citation by proving his Superglide was bone stock, right down to the mufflers. The ticket was dismissed when the court discovered the sound test had been conducted with faulty equipment. In Oregon, a small riders group forced the Department of Motor Vehicles to publish exact decibel thresholds after proving the state had been using unpublished standards. Those numbers later helped dozens of riders pass inspection with confidence. Community organizing began to pay off. Clubs pooled funds to hire lawyers who demanded written policies from enforcement agencies. In several cases, that transparency exposed contradictions. Rules referencing standards that didn't legally exist. Under public pressure, 3 states temporarily suspended enforcement of their updated motorcycle sound tests, pending review. Local governments started hosting listening sessions with riders, something unheard of just months before. Each small victory reminded the community that bureaucracy isn't invincible. Riders learned the language of compliance, using the system's own paperwork to push back. The FX1200, once branded a relic, became a rally symbol again, not because it broke rules, but because it proved they could be challenged. Each courtroom victory felt small but sacred. It wasn't about money, it was about reclaiming respect. For once, bureaucracy had to listen to exhaust pipes instead of executives. Every dismissed ticket echoed louder than any engine, reminding America that defiance can still be documented. Still, the real battle now stretches far beyond garages. Every time a Harley starts, it proves we're still here. If you've seen riders ticketed, fined, or fighting back, drop your story in the comments. I read them all. Hit like to keep this story alive, and subscribe so you don't miss the next truth they'll try to hide. Because this ride isn't over yet, and neither are we.